Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Ripon Society. It's been great to me. It will be a fun evening. Juan's one of my best friends in Congress. He's been just a great leader for all of us. He represents the state of Arizona well. I'm excited. I'm excited to be back in the United States. I was in Germany for 5 days. Traveled over there. Spent a lot of time with the Sergeant Major of the Army, who is the senior most enlisted person in the Army, doing some exercises out there. And I'll tie that into the southwest border, because I know we're going to talk a bit about that. Is the things that happen here at home absolutely impact the world, right? And I'll give you an example. So Fort Bliss in El Paso is in my district. I represent Fort Bliss, and that's where we're flying people, repatriation flights across the country. I mean, across the South America, and then that's also where we send some people to Gitmo. Have you ever been? Has anyone ever been to Gitmo? I have. Okay, it's not an easy place to get to. When I was in the Navy, it's not an easy place to get to, and there's not a lot there, right? So this idea of sending people on this island sounds great, but all that comes at a cost, right? A financial cost. And where are you going to house people? Where are you going to, all these logistics piece to it, and it all interconnects. So when I was in Europe, some of the folks are going, hey, look, whatever the commander-in-chief tells us to do, that's where we're going to flex to. But when you stand up an entire division, right, 10,000 soldiers, to go to the southwest border instead of to go to Europe, that impacts everything. That impacts readiness. Our allies are asking, hey, what about what's going on here? What's the long-term plan? And so it gets very complicated very quickly. What I will say, though, is you're seeing the partners across the world understand that the deck has changed, that there's new administration, that there needs to be new dialogue. And I think a big part of making sure that we were successful in this is making sure we have that dialogue. Juan and I both represent areas along the border, and you need to have that constant dialogue. The border crisis has essentially come to an end very quickly. Overnight, the numbers have plummeted, but it's going to take years in order to kind of tackle some of these issues, and it's going to be costly, right? It is going to be costly. So when you don't have a budget, I'll give you an example. So if we go into a year-long CR, what does that mean to accomplish that? How does that impact us? How does that impact military readiness? And then on the other piece of it too is, I mean, I see a lot of world travelers in here. So we all think what's happening to us here in the United States is just impacting us. It's not. This immigration issue is a global issue. Once again, I mean, Germany's on my mind because I was just there, but they have an election coming up. That's one of the things that's on the ballot there in many cases. And some of the dialogue, it isn't just from the bureaucrats that are kind of involved in this. It's some of the everyday people that are starting to get more engaged, very much like it is back here at home. I'll end with this, and I want to turn over to Juan. I literally was in Fort Bliss a few days ago. I met with the base commander. I met with Border Patrol agents, just on the ground, getting the feel for things. And essentially, people are very excited. They're excited. It's a new day, new page. But they're also very anxious. What does this mean? How do we get there? And you're dealing with multiple agencies. That is never easy. You're dealing with federal, state, local, all that's very complex. And in some cases, many cases, they can't even have basic communication. So if you can't even pick up the radio and talk to somebody on what's happening, how are you going to have even more complex issues or tackling things? So a lot of people are just nervous. I also say too is when you surge that many people, where are you going to house them? Like Fort Bliss is a great place. It's a big place. You can pop up these tents. You can do all these different things. When we exited Afghanistan, that was one of the bases that was primarily used, and it gets used as a Swiss Army knife a lot. But it comes at a cost, and what is that cost is part of it. And the other piece of it too is sometimes that cost isn't in dollars. Sometimes it's in readiness. Sometimes it's in these other areas. You're going through your facilities at a much faster rate. And are you going to be reimbursed for that? At the local government, they're going, we want to be helpful, but what does that mean? We don't enforce immigration, right? What does that mean? And so all these are complex issues, and I look forward to working with Juan and my other colleagues to help solve them.
Great. Well, thanks. I agree with Tony and on everything he's talking about here. including the fact that we're really close, both friends. So he's got 6 kids, I have 6 kids. We haven't made this happen, but if when we go to dinner together, that's going to be one wild.
You got the check.
Yeah.
Wendy's, it might be Wendy's.
Wendy's it is. No, speaking of Wendy's, it wasn't so much the square burger, but when you put the mustard and ketchup on the sandwich there, you have to do a W. And for years after every time I made the kids a sandwich or something, I would just put a W on it. I mean, it took me decades really to get off that muscle memory of putting a W in anything that I made. But listen, just thank you for having us, and thank you for all the work that you do out there as well, and the common sense approach that we do to issues that are not only, I wouldn't say complex only, but they're very timely right now. And this is a time where we need people that are thoughtful going through this, through what we have to do. And we live in a time where the public is demanding very fast action on things, mainly because of how bad things got, how quickly they got, like this in the last 4 years. So the public has been, worn out in a lot of ways. I think when you have people that are normally and genuinely tolerant for immigration policy in some ways, now things have shifted and they've changed. I've always said that when we look at the border, and Tony and I both represent border districts. My entire state fits, the border that my state has fits about 3 times into Tony's district alone. So the area is very different in terms of the size, but also the Texas border is very different than the Arizona border. In Arizona, if you visited, Border Patrol has a saying that they say when you visit one border point, you visited one border point, because they're all very unique. In Arizona, we have vast terrain, a humongous desert, and the policies are different. The agents have different challenges. It takes them about an hour sometimes to get to their post, and then from the office to their actual post, it takes them another hour and a half or 2 hours driving. So it's very different depending on where you are. So the conversation is also different in some ways. When people ask me all the time, and I'll break this down enough. I want to open it up for questions with Tony here, but I always talk about the 3 buckets when we talk about the border, because there are different aspects of the border. People ask me, say, what's your position on this, on the border itself? I always quickly follow it up and say, well, are we talking about border security? Are we talking about trade and commerce? Or are we talking about immigration policy? In my mind, these are 3 separate buckets that people in really, just here, people in Washington or elected officials from around the country that are not from border districts sometimes don't really understand the difference between those, and people tend to look at it from one lens only. As it was said in my bio, I'm an immigrant, so I have an immigrant background. I know that process. It took my family 13 years to become U.S. citizens, and I tell you, there's got to be a better process for that. It can't be that it takes that long, right? This is where the work visas can get done. This is where DACA students deserve a shot at the American dream. This is all the immigration part of it. And then we've got trade and commerce. For Arizona and for Texas and for the U.S., Mexico's our number 1 trading partner. So when you have these conversations around tariffs, it has a direct impact on the local economy, as it does in security. So I came up with a statement that kind of balanced those two and my thoughts on that. But trade and commerce is very important. And then we've got security, number 1 issue, right? As Tony mentioned, numbers have dipped. But my God, for 4 years, this was the issue. And our country was abused on this, and the system was abused. So we've got these 3 that people tend to just look at one lens, just one through the other, instead of actually looking at all 3 and determining what we're talking about. So we got to have a broad common sense approach on this, but one that really I do like the business not as usual here in Washington. We need that. So with that, I'd love to open it up for questions.
I wanted maybe to bring the perspective. I love your 3 buckets, right? To bring the perspective of trade and commerce and security, because both your borders move a lot of cargo. You have the movement of trade. I'm curious, how are you seeing this conversation about security and immigration giving, I don't know if it's given more patience from your districts about how much do we push or pull on the trade side, right? The tariff discussion this weekend was very interesting over the weekend. But we're seeing, of course, the security coming to terms to be able to push on the trade side. And then there's China in the background also impacting that border conversation. So I wanted to hear your thoughts about how are your constituents feeling that pain, and And how can we help you to us companies that move a lot of cargo through your ports of entry?
I'll start, and I'll be brief. Most people have never been to the southern border. They don't know what that means. They all they know is what they see on TV or what they hear about. And it is very complex. And if you live there, you get it. You understand. And it isn't foreign to go over to Mexico for a doctor's appointment or the dentist. It isn't this foreign idea to have someone from Mexico come over and go to your school or in your church or whatever it may be. That isn't foreign. It's natural if you live on there. But there's so few of us that understand that. For everyone else, it's easy to just kind of spew the rhetoric or the talking points, whoever that gave you the talking points on there. But it gets very complicated. I'll end with this and turn over to Juan. Is, when this was December 23, so not this past Christmas, the Christmas before that, in Eagle Pass, there's 10,000 people under the bridge. They had shut down the train. And it was the first time I started getting calls from other members from across the country, essentially saying, hey, I'm getting pushed by, pick a company. They're saying, hey, when is this going to open back up? Because I'm not getting my automobile parts, right? Right. They didn't know. And like, you represent Eagle Pass. Like, well, tell me about that. And in 30 seconds, got to catch them up to speed why it's important that we have this trade and commerce open. And they started to feel that. So most people don't understand it, but it impacts everybody.
Yeah, I mean, about 70% of the lettuce consumed in the U.S. in the winter season comes from Yuma, Arizona. That's a little bit outside my district, but Tony's right. Most people, they don't know where what they're consuming comes from, and I think that's true for most of us. So when it's the border situation, then that's a very specific example of that. How my constituents feel about this, obviously I was in touch with them over the weekend, the importers and those that are in this industry, understanding, and they understand because they also felt one thing about the buckets is that yes, they can be individually dealt with in my example, but they're also intertwined. When you go to the ports of entry for CBP, you realize how the billions of dollars that flow through our ports of entry, but also the high level of security that they play. Fentanyl, that's where its majority of it is stopped at the ports of entry. So we need to enhance technology there. So this whole discussion that we just saw on tariffs was mainly around fentanyl and the piece of human trafficking, things that all Americans want to stop and curb. And the president is in the position to use any tool at his disposal to do that in terms of a negotiation tactic. So that was the nature of that, and the people that I was talking to understood that, but obviously it hurts their bottom line directly, and also our purchasing ability here in the United States. There are things that we could grow here and we can grow here, and sometimes these negotiation tactics, make us look internally, and now we start producing our own stuff here. But then there are other things that we absolutely need to get from somewhere else. Avocados is a good example of that. Now that gets used a lot, but we're just not growing them in the U.S. The way that to meet the demand that we have. So these are the things that we look at of how and where we can actually talk about this in a way that other people understand it around the country as well. I'll be hosting a freshman border trip. Is it public yet? That's fine. Now it is, I guess. We're inviting freshmen, and we want to start this as a tradition that we invite freshmen, a group of freshman Republicans, to the border and show them what the border is like. And we're going to cover the three things so that they can understand that there's a trade component that is huge for their states. If you're from North Carolina or you're from Tennessee, you're from other states that maybe the immigration talk or the border talk is not as common as for Tony in my district, going back and forth, getting your dentist work at 8 a.m. and the Mexico side, and then coming back for lunch at 11 on the U.S. side. I mean, it's very common. So it's a trade aspect, it's a cultural aspect, it's the immigration, it's also the security and how it all plays into each one of our states. So we're going to be doing that now with every freshman class so that they can be exposed to that and understand it better. So we got to share the knowledge, right? We know it because honestly, not because we studied it, but because we lived it. We still live it. So we can't expect others to be at that level of understanding. So we're ambassadors for that.